Welcome to the Launch Anxiety Podcast. I'm Roya Dado, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I work with teens and their parents to help you all navigate the scary space that is growing up and being a happy and healthy adult. Hey everybody, welcome to the Launch Anxiety Podcast. I am licensed therapist Roya Dado, and I mostly work with teens and their parents while the teens are trying to figure out how to grow up and be good adults, and the parents are kind of trying to figure out the same thing. Today we're going to jump into the topic of how to navigate boundary pushing. Knocking things off my desk. We're going to talk about how to navigate when your teens push your buttons and push past your boundaries. But before we start talking about that, I wanted to tell you, those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see that I'm working on something here. I am working on a hexagon quilt. And I wanted to tell you that I'm doing this because I want to invite you to do something too. You can get a craft, you can draw and doodle, whatever it is. I think that we listen and retain and think better when our hands are busy. A big part of what I do when I see clients is I invite them to make art or bring a craft. And so I'm very often also sitting and quilting or crafting with them. And I think it's just, I'll speak better if I'm not just sitting and staring awkwardly at a camera. So I'm quilting right now. I'll throw pictures of what I'm working on in the show notes afterwards. But yeah, I want to invite you to do something as well. So, all right, the topic, navigating when your teens push your boundaries. I'm going to start today off with a little story about teenage me. Once upon a time, when I was 14, somewhere in there, I wanted to go travel. And normally my parents were all about travel. We'd done a lot of it together. We'd done train trips and plane trips and camping trips and all the kinds of trips. But this one, they were not going to let me do. And I was very, very, very angry at them because little Roya wanted to go by herself across the country and go visit a boy. A boy that my parents had never met, stay with his family whom they'd never met. So, shocker, they said no. Now, knowing my parents, they probably also said no. But let's talk and see, can we all go maybe figure out a road trip? Can we meet halfway? Can we invite him here? I'm sure that they were super reasonable. But 14-year-old, 15-year-old me was the opposite of super reasonable. I was really, really upset. And I remember so strongly the feelings of injustice and frustration and feeling just out of control and powerless. And I remember getting mad at my dad and then running to my bedroom. And it's entirely possible that at that point I did some journaling or painting or talked on the phone with friends. I don't know. Or I went straight into this next part. What I did was climb out of my bedroom window. Now, I was not a super rebellious teenager. I was not a kid who snuck out, I think, ever. I don't think I ever did that. But I did this one time. I climbed out of my bedroom window. It's not quite as dramatic as it sounds. It was a first floor window, and even right on the outside, there was a hose box. So I didn't even have to make it all the way to the ground. I just stepped and got out. And I walked barefoot across my front lawn and knocked on my own front door. And my dad opened the door looking very confused. And I remember saying something along the lines of, I don't want to sneak out and go anywhere. I just want you to know that I could if I wanted to. And to my parents' credit, that's what I remember about this interaction. I remember my feelings and I remember my behavior. Because I don't really remember their response, I know that it wasn't big. I know that it wasn't loud. I know that it wasn't angry or punitive. I am so impressed by their ability to kind of depersonalize it, to take themselves and their feelings out of it and just let me have my feelings. So impressed. If they had gotten upset, if they had gotten angry, if they'd punished me for the, fact that I snuck out my window, I think I would have learned a really different lesson. They would have put this barrier between us, and I would have been able to treat them as the enemy. And to be honest, that's what I wanted in that moment. I wanted them to be the enemy. I was angry and looking for somewhere to put it. And I am forever impressed by their ability to, not show up for the party that I was inviting them to. So fast forward a little bit. but only a little bit, because although I am much older than I was in that story, it still sometimes feels like it's yesterday. And that's because the feeling is universal. Toddlers, adults, teenagers, we all have that feeling. We all have that feeling of someone else is controlling us, that what you do or say doesn't matter, that you have a want that you can't make happen. We all know that feeling. And so I want all of us adults to be very, very in tune with that and remember that even though we might not understand why something is important to our teenager in that moment, we can understand the emotions behind it for sure. And not only can we understand the emotions behind it, but we've had experience with our teenagers doing this in a way that was probably a little bit easier to deal with. Every single one of our kids, when they're a toddler, act in a similar way. I think about like my 3-year-old, the sentence, I do it myself, I do it myself. And the number of times the phrase, I do it myself, was accompanied by her grabbing something out of my hands and spilling it everywhere. I have one memorable morning where it happened like 3 times in a row where I was trying to pour cereal and I do it myself. And at some point the Costco size thing of Cheerios was all over the floor. And then another time the entire gallon of milk was all over the floor. I think the bowl landed there. And now if I had been thinking clearly in that moment, I probably would have set her up better for being successful in that moment because it was a very predictable thing. Toddlers also have a very strong push to be more independent at that age. They do want to do it themselves. They have a newfound appreciation of what they can do in terms of their own skills and abilities. They see the goal and they want to make it happen. They just don't always have the strength or the hand-eye coordination to successfully complete the task, but they want to do it. And as a parent, it is my job to understand that they're performing a developmentally appropriate task. They're supposed to be trying to do it on their own. They're supposed to be trying to pour the cereal, to make their own breakfast. It's my job to maybe, put the cereal in a smaller container so that when it spills everywhere, it's only that much and not the whole giant bag of it. Or maybe I switch out to plastic bowls instead of ceramic ones. Maybe I start by pouring some milk in a cup and then they can pour what's in the cup in the bowl. There's so many different ways to be creative about how to help a toddler be more independent. And most of us are a little more willing to be resourceful and creative in that sense. But when it comes to teenagers, the things that they want to be independent about so often just strike fear in our hearts that we can't see it for what it is, which is just a desire to be more independent and a desire to grow and show that our skills can match a challenging situation. So it's nothing different, just the stakes are higher. And so our job is still to think about how do we set our kids up to be successful while they're taking on more independence, while they're taking on more risk-taking. And so that's a huge part of navigating the boundary pushing, is to recognize it for what it is. It's saying, I want more. I can do it myself. Please let me grow up. Help me grow up. Do the equivalent of putting the milk in a cup so I can feel independent as I pour it. Figure out creatively how to parent in this particular developmental stage. So speaking of how toddlers and teenagers are going through a lot of similar developmental milestones, my sister, when she was young, in the 5, 6, 7 years old department, would come down these little stairs we had every morning, dressed up as a different fairy tale character, dramatically proclaim that today she was Cinderella or Red Riding Hood or Snow White or whoever she was. And it wasn't that today I'm pretending to be. Oh, no, she was, right? Today she was Snow White. And we all had to call her Snow White or suffer the consequences. And that was just what she did for a while. And I think about teenagerhood in much the same vein, where this is a time of growth, of figuring yourself out, of trying to understand where you fit into the world and what your identity is and how you're the same and how you're different from your family and just all of that that's happening. But one of the ways it kind of has to happen is to assume the mantle of that thing. So in the same way that my sister was Snow White, teenagers often say, I am whatever the thing is. It becomes a part of their identity out of necessity. When you're a teenager, it's not necessarily even like beneficial to do light exploration or identity formation. It has to be full throttle. It's still experimentation though, but this part can really scare parents, particularly because very often teens are trying to figure out who they are separate from their families, and so the identities that they're experimenting with can go in direct opposition to the parents' value system. I can't tell you the number of teenagers I've worked with where their family is vegetarian, and so they decide to not only eat meat, but like raise a pig and cure their own bacon. Or their parents, or the other way around, their parents are super, super meat eaters and they decide to go like full eat local vegan. The same thing goes for all sorts of values, political, philosophical. This is what teenagers do. It is normal. It is healthy. It is good for them to push back against a parent and what a parent's value system is and figure out how much of it they want to adopt and own themselves. I often use the metaphor of feeling like you are like the wall of a pool that a kid is using to push off and see how far they can swim. And it doesn't always feel good to get pushed off against like that, but it's not personal. It's not about you. It's about them figuring out how far they can swim and how strong their arms are. So this sort of intense trying something on, it's not make-believe. Like your teenager isn't faking it. It's not pretend in that way. But it is experimentation. It is figuring it out. And so I get a lot of parents who'll say things like, I don't recognize my teen anymore. And one of the things I want parents to remember is very often your teenagers don't recognize themselves either. And that's scary. It's scary, but it's also exciting. And it also means that they're doing a lot of thinking and processing and figuring. But that's not necessarily a negative. It's okay not to recognize them exactly. It's okay that they're changing. It's okay that they're trying new things on. I think it is very important for us as parents to, again, take that breath and remember that it's not actually about us. So this is the point where I want to tell parents that if you are struggling with that, if you feel like your teens are pushing boundaries, they are pushing your buttons, they're engaging in maybe like genuinely risky, dangerous behaviors and you don't know how to help them, or maybe you recognize that it's like super developmentally appropriate for them, but you are struggling, I want to make sure to invite you to do that work separate from them. I might be biased, but I think a good therapist can really help with this thing. And if that's not an option for you right now, I want to encourage you to check out my free parenting guide. It's about 40 pages and it's full of exercises and questions for parents of teenagers to help you do that kind of processing, to help you figure out why your values are clashing with each other, to give you some new language for how to think and speak about some of their boundary pushing. It's available at launchanxiety.com, and I'll put a link to it wherever I post this. But I really hope that you download that. It's got space to work. It's a workbook, so it's got space for you to write and process. And then if there are specific areas where you're really struggling, it's also full of resources for you for your next steps as well. So I hope that's helpful. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I run all my social media everything, so you're always welcome to send me a message. And in the meantime, those of you who are watching on YouTube, that's what I've been working on. And I will put it in the show notes for anybody who's listening. Take care, everybody.